The night was calm, the kind of calm that only a farm in the middle of nowhere could muster. Crickets chirped in rhythmic waves, and the faint rustle of the cornfield swayed in time with the breeze. Ben Harlow, a man who had made peace with the monotony of rural life, sat on the creaky porch of his farmhouse, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. Rufus, his trusty Labrador, lay sprawled at his feet, snoring gently. Ben sighed, gazing at the endless expanse of stars above. They were brighter out here, away from the light pollution of the cities he'd left behind years ago. He often found himself wondering about the stars, not in any philosophical way, but more in the "what's the point of all that glitter when my tractor won't start" kind of way. The peace shattered with a sound that didn't belong. It started as a low hum, barely audible over the crickets. Then it grew, a strange, resonant vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Rufus perked up, ears twitching, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Ben froze, his mug halfway to his lips. "What in the—" Ben muttered, setting the cup down. The hum crescendoed into a sharp metallic whine, followed by a flash of light so bright it turned the cornfield into a sea of gold for an instant. Rufus bolted off the porch, barking wildly. "Rufus, get back here!" Ben shouted, grabbing his flashlight and a rusted shovel. Because what else does a man grab when he thinks the apocalypse has landed in his backyard? The cornfield loomed ahead, dark and dense, its stalk swaying unnaturally. Ben's boots crunched against the dry soil as he pushed through, his flashlight beam cutting a narrow path. Rufus's barking turned into a series of confused yelps, and then silence. "Rufus!" Ben called, his voice cracking. Then he saw it. A faint glow pulsed through the corn like a heartbeat, casting long, eerie shadows. Ben edged closer, his grip tightening on the shovel. The glow grew brighter until he stumbled into a small clearing, and there she was. At first, Ben thought it was some kind of mannequin, one of those high-tech scarecrows the government might have sent to spy on his crop yield. But mannequins didn't breathe, and they certainly didn't have skin that shimmered like polished silver under moonlight. She stood there wobbling unsteadily, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of fear and confusion. Her hair, or what Ben assumed was hair, floated around her head like wisps of smoke, and her suit, a sleek, liquid-like material, rippled as if alive. "What in the hell are you?" Ben blurted before he could stop himself. The woman, if that's what she was, tilted her head, her lips moving, but the sounds that came out were a blend of musical tones and static. It was like listening to a broken radio tuned to an alien opera. Okay, Ben said, holding up his hands. "Let's just take it easy, all right? You don't zap me. I don't whack you with this shovel. Deal?" She blinked, then took an unsteady step forward. Ben instinctively stepped back, his flashlight shaking. "Hey now, personal space. Ever heard of it?" She tilted her head again, then pointed at his flashlight. The device flickered, the beam twisting and distorting before it cut out completely. "Great, that's just great," Ben muttered. "First my tractor, now my flashlight. You got anything else you want to break while you're at it?" The woman, or whatever she was, wavered on her feet, then collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. Ben hesitated for a moment, his brain waging war with itself. Every sensible part of him screamed to run back to the house, lock the doors, and pretend this night never happened. But then there was Rufus, sniffing the strange woman's face and wagging his tail like she'd just handed him a steak. "Rufus, you're supposed to protect me, not make friends with the alien," Ben grumbled, crouching down. Up close she looked fragile. Her skin, despite its metallic sheen, had a softness to it, and her breathing was shallow. Ben poked her shoulder with the handle of the shovel. "Hey, you alive?" Her eyes fluttered open, and she muttered something unintelligible. Then, to Ben's utter disbelief, a small device embedded in her wrist lit up and emitted a garbled voice. Where? Not location." Ben blinked. "Well, that clears everything up." The woman groaned, her hand twitching toward the device. She pressed something, and the voice came again, this time slightly clearer. Where am I? Ben stared at her, then at Rufus, then back at her. Lady, you're on my farm, middle of nowhere Earth. Population, me and this dumb dog. Her eyes widened, and she whispered something in her musical language before passing out again. Fantastic, Ben muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. I always wanted to play host to a space lady who can't even stay conscious. He slung the shovel over his shoulder and sighed. Guess we're taking her to the house, Rufus, but if she tries to eat my face, I'm blaming you. Rufus barked in agreement, or at least, that's how Ben chose to interpret it. Back at the farmhouse, Ben laid the woman on the couch, covering her with an old quilt. She didn't stir, but the strange glow from her skin dimmed slightly, as if she were finally at rest. Rufus curled up beside her, his tail thumping against the floor. Ben sat down in his armchair, staring at her. All right, Harlow, you've officially lost it. Alien women don't just drop out of the sky. This is probably a dream, or food poisoning. That chili did taste a little funny. But deep down, he knew this was real. The woman's presence was undeniable, and so was the nagging feeling that his quiet, predictable life had just been turned upside down. Guess I'll figure it out in the morning, Ben muttered, leaning back. If she doesn't blow up the house by then. With that, he closed his eyes, the faint hum of the alien's wrist device lulling him into an uneasy sleep. Ben woke to the sound of something crashing in the kitchen. For a brief, blissful moment, he thought it was just Rufus getting into the trash again. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. The glow in the cornfield, the strange woman, the broken flashlight. He groaned and sat up, rubbing his face. Please tell me I didn't dream the part where she passed out and not the part where she might disintegrate me. Another crash came, followed by the unmistakable sound of Rufus barking and what could only be described as a series of alien chimes. Ben bolted to his feet and stumbled into the kitchen, where chaos awaited. The woman, alien, visitor, whatever she was, stood in front of his open fridge, her metallic suit glinting in the early morning light. She was holding a carton of eggs in one hand and what looked like a jar of pickles in the other, studying both as if trying to determine which was edible. Rufus danced around her feet, wagging his tail like she was his new best friend. Hey! Ben barked, startling her. She spun around, and for a moment, Ben was certain she was going to throw the eggs at him. Instead, she tilted her head, the pickles still in her hand. Explain, she said, her voice smooth but robotic, like it was being filtered through her wrist device. Explain what? Ben asked, still trying to process the sight of an alien raiding his fridge. She pointed to the eggs. These, purpose? They're eggs. You eat them. Her eyes narrowed, and she looked back at the carton. Contain offspring? Ben's face turned red. No. Well, technically yes, but not like that. They're just food. Look, can you stop interrogating my groceries for 5 seconds? The woman set the eggs down carefully, as if they might explode, and placed the pickles beside them. She stepped back, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. Food, she said slowly, nodding. Understood. Ben sighed, leaning against the counter. All right, let's start with the basics. Who are you, and why are you wrecking my kitchen? The woman's gaze dropped to the device on her wrist, which emitted a soft hum. She pressed a button, and a holographic display flickered to life, showing a jumble of symbols and diagrams that meant nothing to Ben. Designation Lyris, she said, her tone formal. Lyris, huh? Well, I'm Ben, and that's Rufus. He gestured to the dog, who was now sniffing the eggs with great interest. You're on my farm, in case you haven't figured that out yet. Farm, Lyris repeated, testing the word. She looked around the kitchen, her gaze lingering on the worn cabinets and the old coffee maker. Primitive. Functional. Ben scowled. Hey, I'll have you know this is top-of-the-line, 1985 technology. Lyris didn't seem impressed. She tapped her wrist device again, and a soft beep echoed through the room. Location: Earth, rural sector, data incomplete. Ben crossed his arms. You don't know where you are, do you? Lyris hesitated, her expression flickering between confusion and frustration. Memory: fragmented. Arrival: unclear. Ben sighed. Figures. All right, Lyris, let's get something straight. I don't know who you are, what you're running from, or why you decided to crash land on my property, but I've got enough problems without adding alien drama to the mix. Lyris tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. Assistance required. Hostile entities pursue. Hostile entities? Great. That's just what I needed, Ben muttered. Look, I'm a farmer, not a soldier. You've got the wrong guy for this. Before Lyris could respond, a low hum filled the air, faint but unmistakable. Ben froze, his eyes darting to the window. What's that? Lyris's expression darkened. Signal detected. Proximity. Close. Ben peeked outside and immediately regretted it. Hovering just above the tree line was a sleek black drone, its surface glinting like obsidian. It emitted a faint pulsing light as it scanned the area, its movements unnervingly precise. Tell me that's not one of your hostile entities, Ben said, his voice tight. Lyris didn't answer. Instead, she pressed a sequence of buttons on her wrist device, and her suit rippled, shifting to a duller, less reflective color. What are you doing? Ben asked. Evade detection, she said simply. Evade? What about me? I don't have a fancy alien suit to hide in. Lyris glanced at him, then at the drone outside. Remain still. Unlikely target. Unlikely target? Lady, I'm standing in a farmhouse with no cover, and that thing looks like it means business. The drone emitted a sharp beep, its light focusing on the farmhouse. Ben's heart raced as it hovered closer, the hum growing louder. All right, that's it, he muttered, grabbing a nearby broom. If it comes in here, I'm swatting it like a giant bug. Lyris raised an eyebrow. Ineffective strategy. Well, excuse me for not having a laser cannon handy. Before Lyris could respond, the drone fired a small glowing projectile that struck the ground just outside the house. The explosion wasn't large, but it was enough to send a shower of dirt and debris against the windows. Ben ducked instinctively, pulling Rufus down with him. Okay, now it's personal. Lyris stepped forward, her wrist device glowing brightly. She pressed a button, and a pulse of energy shot out, hitting the drone squarely. It wobbled, sparks flying before crashing into the field with a satisfying thud. Ben stared at her, wide-eyed. What the hell was that? Defensive measure, Lyris said, her tone calm. Ben stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans. Defensive measure? You could have mentioned that before I grabbed a broom. Lyris didn't reply. She walked to the window, her gaze fixed on the smoking remains of the drone. More will come, she said quietly. Ben groaned, running a hand through his hair. Of course they will. Why wouldn't they? My life wasn't complicated enough already. Lyris turned to him, her expression serious. Assistance required. Mutual survival priority. Ben sighed, slumping into a chair. Fine. But you're explaining this to my insurance company when they ask why my cornfield looks like a war zone. Rufus barked in agreement, wagging his tail. Ben glanced at the dog, then back at Lyris. And you're making breakfast. You already broke into my fridge. You might as well put those eggs to good use. Lyris tilted her head, considering this. Breakfast. Negotiation accepted. Ben shook his head, muttering under his breath. Alien invasions and scrambled eggs. What a way to start the day. Ben sat at the kitchen table, staring at the plate in front of him. The eggs, scrambled technically, were a shade of green that eggs had no business being. Beside them sat a slice of bread, toasted so unevenly it looked like a topographical map of a disaster zone. Lyris stood across from him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I call it Earth breakfast, she said, her tone laced with a faint hint of pride. Ben poked at the eggs with his fork, watching them jiggle. Yeah, this looks, creative. Did you follow a recipe or just, wing it? Lyris frowned. Instructions were unclear. Device analysis indicates eggs are heat-sensitive protein units. Toast required combustion. Logical Ben sighed, glancing at Rufus, who was sitting eagerly at his feet, tail wagging. Well, buddy, looks like you're the brave one today. He scraped the eggs off his plate and onto the floor. Rufus sniffed them, hesitated, then gave Ben a look that said, Really? All right, fine, Ben muttered, grabbing the toast. At least this can't kill me. He took a cautious bite, immediately regretting it. Scratch that. I think you burned half of it and froze the other half. How is that even possible? Lyris tilted her head, her silvery hair shimmering faintly in the sunlight streaming through the window. Primitive cooking tools, suboptimal conditions. Ben swallowed hard, chasing the toast with a gulp of coffee. Suboptimal? Lady, you set my toaster to Armageddon. Lyris didn't respond, instead turning her attention to the holographic display on her wrist device. The symbols shifted rapidly, and she frowned. Signal disruption persists. Pursuers remain active. Ben leaned back in his chair, setting the toast down. You keep mentioning these pursuers. Care to elaborate, or is that on a need-to-know basis? Lyris hesitated, her gaze flicking to the window. Hostile faction. Designation, enforcers. Purpose, retrieval. Retrieval of what? You? She nodded. I possess classified data. High value. Escape was necessary. Ben raised an eyebrow. Classified, huh? So you're some kind of space spy? Incorrect. Scientist. Scientist? Ben snorted. Well, that explains why you nearly weaponized my breakfast. What kind of science are we talking about here? Lyris hesitated again, her expression shifting to something almost vulnerable. Research pertains to interdimensional stability, advanced applications. Ben blinked. Interdimensional what now? Before Lyris could answer, Rufus let out a low growl, his ears pinning back. Ben followed the dog's gaze to the window, where the faint shimmer of something unnatural caught his eye. Lyris, I think we've got company. Lyris moved quickly, her wrist device glowing as she scanned the area. Detection field breached. Enforcers approaching. Ben's stomach sank. Great. Just what I needed. Let me guess. They're not here to borrow sugar? Negative. Of course not. Ben stood, grabbing his trusty shovel from where it leaned against the wall. All right. What's the plan? And don't say remain still again. That didn't work last time. Lyris glanced at the shovel, her expression bordering on amused. Primitive weapon. Ineffective. Hey, this shovel's been in my family for 3 generations. It's seen its fair share of action. Against crops, perhaps. Ben scowled. All right, Miss Fancy Wrist Gadget, what do you suggest? Lyris didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the center of the room, her wrist device projecting a holographic map of the area. Red dots blinked ominously near the farmhouse, closing in fast. Escape is imperative, she said. Vehicle required. Ben frowned. Vehicle? You mean my truck? That thing hasn't started in months? Lyris turned to him, her expression unreadable. Then we repair it. Repair it? Do you know anything about engines? Number, but you do. Ben opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She wasn't wrong. With a resigned sigh, he grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. All right, fine, but if this ends with us getting vaporized, I'm blaming you. The old pickup truck sat in the barn, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Ben popped the hood, grimacing at the state of the engine. Well, this is gonna take a miracle, he muttered. Lyris stepped forward, her wrist device glowing faintly. Assistance available. Ben raised an eyebrow. Oh, now you're a mechanic? Negative. Analytical capacity enhanced. She pressed a button, and a thin beam of light scanned the engine. Fault detected. Ignition coil compromised. Fuel line obstructed. Ben stared at her. You just figured that out in 2 seconds? Correct. All right, fine. But don't expect me to be impressed until this thing actually runs. Working together, though together, was a loose term, considering Lyris mostly stood back and pointed out problems. Ben managed to replace the ignition coil with a spare and clear the fuel line. By the time they were done, his hands were covered in grease, and Rufus had wandered off to chase a squirrel. Moment of truth, Ben said, climbing into the driver's seat. He turned the key, and to his amazement, the engine sputtered to life. Lyris tilted her head, her expression almost smug. Primitive. Functional Ben grinned despite himself. All right, I'll give you that one. Now let's get out of here before your friends show up. As they pulled out of the barn, the ground shook, and a blinding light erupted behind them. Ben glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a sleek black craft descending into the cornfield, its surface bristling with weaponry. Tell me that's not what I think it is, he said. Enforcer craft, Lyris confirmed. Of course it is, hang on. Ben floored the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward with a groan. The Enforcer craft gave chase, its engines emitting an ominous hum. Do you have any more of those defensive measures? Ben shouted over the noise. Limited capacity, Lyris replied. Energy reserves depleted. Great. So it's just us and the truck. Fantastic. The craft fired a burst of energy, narrowly missing the truck and leaving a smoking crater in the road. All right, that's it, Ben growled, yanking the wheel to swerve around the crater. If we survive this, you're fixing my cornfield. Lyris didn't respond, her focus entirely on the craft. Her wrist device glowed faintly, and she muttered something in her native language. What are you doing? Ben asked. Calculating probabilities. Yeah? And what are the odds we don't die? Lyris glanced at him, her expression deadpan. Low. Ben groaned. You're really bad at pep talks, you know that? As the craft closed in, Ben spotted a narrow dirt path leading into the woods. Without thinking, he veered onto it, the truck bouncing wildly over the uneven terrain. The Enforcer craft hesitated, its larger size making it harder to navigate the dense trees. Ha! Ben shouted. How's that for primitive? Bet your fancy spaceship doesn't have four-wheel drive. Lyris raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The craft fired one last shot, missing them by inches before retreating, its engines roaring in frustration. Ben let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, that was fun. Let's never do it again. Lyris nodded, her expression serious. Agreed. As they emerged from the woods, the farmhouse now a distant memory, Ben glanced at Lyris. So, what's next? Survival, she said simply. Ben sighed. Great. Just great. Rufus barked from the back seat, wagging his tail. Well, at least someone's enjoying this, Ben muttered, gripping the wheel. The truck rattled down the narrow back road, its engine coughing in protest every few miles. Rufus had claimed the back seat as his personal kingdom, sprawled out and snoring like the chase with an alien death drone hadn't just happened. Ben, gripping the wheel tightly, glanced at Lyris, who was staring intently at her wrist device as if willing it to produce a miracle. All right, Lyris, Ben said, breaking the silence. We've got about half a tank of gas, no plan, and I'm pretty sure this truck's held together by duct tape and prayer. Where exactly are we going? Lyris didn't look up. Destination unclear. Priority, evade enforcers. Ben snorted. Evade enforcers. Sure, why don't we just add solve world hunger and invent time travel while we're at it? Lyris finally glanced at him, her expression as calm and unreadable as ever. Time travel impractical, requires significant energy resources. Ben blinked. That was sarcasm. Noted. Ben sighed, shaking his head. All right, let's try this again. What's the nearest safe place? You've got all that fancy tech. Don't tell me it can't find us a hideout. Lyris tapped a few buttons on her wrist device, and a holographic map flickered to life. The map was dotted with glowing symbols, most of which were flashing red. Proximity to secure zones. Minimal, she said. Ben squinted at the map. What about that green dot over there? Looks promising. Lyris frowned. Abandoned structure. High probability of structural instability. Sounds like my kind of place, Ben said with a grin. Let's head there. Lyris hesitated but didn't argue. The abandoned structure turned out to be an old gas station, the kind that hadn't seen a customer since the Reagan administration. The sign out front was missing most of its letters, leaving it to advertise something called GS and GB. Gas and goobers? Ben guessed as he pulled into the cracked parking lot. Lyris raised an eyebrow. Goobers? It's a candy. You know, chocolate-covered peanuts? Classic road trip snack. Primitive nutrition. Ben rolled his eyes. You've got to stop calling everything primitive. It's bad for morale. Lyris didn't respond, already scanning the area with her wrist device. The inside of the gas station was even worse than the outside. The shelves were empty, save for a few ancient cans of motor oil and a lone bag of chips that looked like it might predate the moon landing. Ben picked up the bag, examining it. Think these are still good? Lyris glanced at it, then at him. Probability of safe consumption. 12%. Ben shrugged. Better odds than you're cooking. Rufus sniffed at the floor, his tail wagging as he discovered a dusty tennis ball under one of the shelves. He picked it up and trotted over to Ben, dropping it at his feet. Good find, buddy, Ben said, tossing the ball lightly. Rufus barked happily, chasing it across the room. Lyris, meanwhile, had moved to the back of the station, her wrist device emitting a soft hum. Energy readings detected, she said. Ben followed her, curious. Energy readings? From what? She pointed to a door marked Employees Only. The sign was barely hanging on, one screw loose. Ben pushed the door open, revealing a small storage room. At first glance, it was unremarkable. Just a few rusted shelves and a broken mop. But in the corner, partially hidden under a tarp, was something that definitely didn't belong. What the? Ben muttered, pulling the tarp aside. Underneath was a sleek metallic device, about the size of a microwave, with glowing blue panels and a series of strange symbols etched into its surface. Lyris's eyes widened slightly, the most emotion Ben had seen from her so far. Quantum relay module, she said, almost reverently. Quantum what now? Advanced technology, capable of generating interdimensional energy fields. Ben frowned. In English, please. It's a power source, Lyris said, her tone clipped. Highly valuable, potentially dangerous. Ben took a step back. Dangerous? Great. Just what we need. Before Lyris could respond, Rufus barked sharply from the front of the station. Ben's stomach sank. That's his, we're about to have a problem bark. Lyris moved quickly, her wrist device glowing as she scanned the area. Hostiles inbound, multiple signatures. Ben groaned. Of course there are. Can't we catch a break for 5 minutes? The hum of an approaching enforcer craft grew louder, the sound sending a chill down Ben's spine. All right, what's the plan? He asked, glancing at Lyris. She was already examining the quantum relay module, her fingers flying over its surface as she activated it. The device emitted a low hum, its blue panels glowing brighter. Plan improvisation, she said. Ben threw up his hands. Improvisation? That's not a plan. That's a recipe for disaster. Your alternative? Ben hesitated, then sighed. Fine. Improvisation it is. Then the first enforcer drone burst through the front window, its sleek black form glinting in the dim light. Rufus growled, standing protectively in front of Ben. Stay back, boy, Ben said, grabbing a rusty wrench from a nearby shelf. The drone fired a small energy bolt, narrowly missing him. Hey, Ben shouted. Do I look like a threat to you? Lyris didn't answer, too focused on the quantum relay module. The device was now emitting a series of high-pitched tones, its energy field expanding. "Status update?" Ben called, dodging another energy bolt. "Field stabilization in progress," Lyris replied. "Great. And how long is that going to take?" "Unknown." Ben groaned. Of course it's unknown. The second drone appeared, its weapons charging. Ben gripped the wrench tightly, his mind racing. "All right, you shiny little buzzards," he muttered. "Let's dance." He hurled the wrench at the first drone, hitting it squarely in its sensor array. The drone wobbled, sparks flying, before crashing into a shelf of motor oil. "Ha! Take that!" The second drone fired, its energy bolt hitting the floor inches from Ben's feet. "Lyris, any time now," he shouted. "Field activation imminent," she said, her tone maddeningly calm. The quantum relay module emitted a sudden burst of light, the energy field expanding rapidly. The remaining drone froze mid-air, its system shorting out as the field enveloped it. Ben shielded his eyes, the light fading as quickly as it had appeared. When he looked up, the drones were gone, reduced to smoking heaps on the floor. Lyris stood, her expression calm but focused. Field successful. Hostiles neutralized. Ben let out a shaky breath, leaning against the wall. "Yeah, well, remind me to never doubt your improvisation again," Rufus barked, wagging his tail. Ben glanced at the dog, then at Lyris. "So, what now?" Lyris examined the quantum relay module, her expression unreadable. "Now, we prepare for escalation." Ben groaned. "Escalation? Can't we just, hide out in a bunker and eat goobers for the rest of our lives?" Lyris raised an eyebrow. "Unlikely scenario." "Figures." Ben sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, let's get moving before more of your friends show up, and next time maybe warn me before activating the alien death box, huh?" Lyris didn't respond, but Ben could have sworn he saw the faintest hint of a smile. The truck bounced along the uneven dirt road, every pothole threatening to shake it into its component parts. Ben gritted his teeth as he wrestled with the wheel, the truck groaning in protest. Rufus, ever the optimist, hung his head out the window, tongue flapping in the wind, blissfully unaware of their predicament. Lyris sat in the passenger seat, her posture as composed as ever, though her eyes were fixed on the holographic display projected from her wrist device. The quantum relay module sat between them, strapped in with a bungee cord, humming softly like it was enjoying the ride. "All right," Ben said, his voice strained. "We've got one busted truck, a cosmic toaster, and about 2 hours of daylight left. Care to explain what the plan is before we drive straight into another ambush?" Lyris didn't look up. "Current trajectory leads to an abandoned observatory. Minimal enforcer activity detected in the vicinity." "Abandoned observatory?" Ben raised an eyebrow. "Sounds cozy. Let me guess. Haunted by the ghosts of astronomers past?" "Unlikely," Lyris replied without missing a beat. "Ghosts are a fictional construct." Ben smirked. "You're no fun, you know that." Rufus barked in agreement, his tail thumping against the door. The observatory came into view just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in shades of orange and purple. It was perched on a hill, its dome-shaped roof silhouetted against the sky. The place looked like it hadn't seen a maintenance crew in decades, paint peeling, windows cracked, and a satellite dish leaning precariously to one side. Ben parked the truck at the base of the hill, cutting the engine with a sigh of relief. "Well, it's no 5-star hotel, but I guess it'll do." As they approached the observatory, Rufus bounded ahead, his nose to the ground. He stopped suddenly, growling at a bush that rustled ominously. Ben froze. "Please tell me that's just a squirrel." The bush rustled again, and a small, round creature emerged. It was about the size of a basketball, covered in iridescent scales that shimmered in the fading light. It had 6 spindly legs, a pair of oversized eyes, and what looked suspiciously like a set of antennae. Ben stared at it. "What in the name of intergalactic roadkill is that?" The creature chirped, tilting its head as it regarded them curiously. Lyra stepped forward, scanning it with her wrist device. Species: glebe. Non-hostile. Native to Zorath. 7. Ben blinked. A glebe? Sounds like something you'd order at a space diner. Yeah, I'll have a glebe sandwich with extra mayo. The glebe chirped again, scuttling closer. Rufus sniffed at it, his tail wagging cautiously. Lyris crouched down, extending a hand toward the creature. It appears to be lost. Ben crossed his arms. Great. Another stray. What are we running here? A cosmic petting zoo. The glebe hopped onto Lyris's outstretched hand, its scales glinting like a disco ball. Lyris examined it closely, her expression softening ever so slightly. Cute, Ben admitted. But if it lays eggs in the truck, you're cleaning it up. Inside the observatory, the air was musty, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. The main room was dominated by a massive telescope, its base covered in cobwebs. Ben shivered as he brushed a particularly large web off his shoulder. This place is a fixer-upper, he muttered. You sure it's safe? Lyris didn't answer, already setting up the quantum relay module on a nearby table. The glebe perched on her shoulder, watching her work with wide, curious eyes. Ben wandered over to the telescope, wiping a layer of dust off the eyepiece. He peered through it, only to be greeted by a view of complete darkness. Figures, he said. Even the telescope's on strike. Lyris glanced at him. The observatory's systems are offline. Restoring power will be necessary for further analysis. Ben sighed. Of course it will. And let me guess, it's up to me to figure out how to do that? Affirmative. Ben groaned. You're really milking this whole alien genius thing, aren't you? Lyris didn't respond, but the glebe let out a chirp that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. After rummaging through a storage closet filled with broken tools and questionable wiring, Ben managed to locate the observatory's power panel. It looked like it hadn't been touched since the 80s, and half the switches were labeled in faded marker. This is fine, he muttered to himself. Totally fine. I'm great at fixing things. Like that time I tried to repair the toaster and almost burned the house down. Rufus sat nearby, watching him with an expression that could only be described as skeptical. Don't give me that look, Ben said. I've got this under control. He flipped a switch, and the lights flickered to life. The telescope whirred, its motor groaning as it adjusted its position. Ha! Ben exclaimed. See? I told you I could— A loud pop interrupted him, followed by a shower of sparks. The lights dimmed again, leaving the room bathed in an eerie glow. Ben sighed. Okay, maybe not entirely under control. Lyris appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Power restored, partial functionality achieved. Ben gestured to the sparking panel. Partial functionality? This thing's one bad wire away from exploding. Lyris tilted her head. Acceptable risk. Ben threw up his hands. Acceptable risk? You're going to be the death of me, you know that? With the power partially restored, Lyris activated the observatory's main console. A holographic display lit up, showing a map of the surrounding area. The relay module requires calibration, she said. This location will provide optimal conditions for synchronization. Ben leaned against the console, eyeing the map. And what happens after we synchronize it? Lyris hesitated. The relay will emit a signal, a distress beacon. Ben frowned. A distress beacon? Won't that just attract more of your enforcer buddies? Possibly, Lyris admitted. But it is also our best chance of contacting allies. Ben sighed. Great. So we're betting everything on a cosmic game of hide-and-seek. The glebe chirped, hopping onto the console and tapping one of the buttons with its tiny leg. The map zoomed in, revealing a cluster of glowing symbols. Lyris's eyes narrowed. Unusual energy readings detected. Source unknown. Ben squinted at the display. Unusual? Like what? Another quantum doodad? Possibly, Lyris said. Or something more dangerous. Ben groaned. Why is it never something less dangerous? Like, I don't know, a box of space cookies? The glebe chirped again, its antennae twitching. Lyris stood, her expression resolute. We must investigate. Ben rubbed his temples. Of course we must, because sitting still and not dying is apparently too much to ask. Rufus barked, wagging his tail. Ben glanced at the dog, then at Lyris and the glebe. Fine. Let's go investigate the mysterious energy thing. But if this ends with me getting vaporized, I'm haunting all of you. Lyris didn't respond, but for a moment, Ben thought he saw the faintest flicker of amusement in her eyes. The truck rolled to a stop at the base of a rocky ridge, its headlights casting long shadows against the jagged terrain. The map on Lyris's wrist display flickered, zooming in on the source of the strange energy readings. Let me guess, Ben said, cutting the engine. Whatever's up there is going to make me regret getting out of this truck. Lyris stepped out without answering, her silver jumpsuit catching the moonlight as she studied the ridge. Rufus hopped down after her, his tail wagging as he sniffed at the dry alien soil. Ben groaned and followed, grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment. The glebe was perched on the dashboard, chirping insistently. No, you're staying here, Ben told it. Last thing I need is you running off and causing a galactic incident. The glebe let out a mournful trill, its scales dimming slightly. Ben sighed. Fine, but you're riding in my jacket pocket. And if you explode, I'm billing your home planet for dry cleaning. The glebe chirped happily, hopping into his pocket with a surprising amount of enthusiasm for a creature that resembled a glittery grapefruit. The climb up the ridge was steep and uneven, the rocks loose underfoot. Ben grumbled with every step, the flashlight beam bobbing as he stumbled over yet another rock. Do aliens ever build anything on flat ground? He muttered. Elevation provides strategic advantage, Lyris replied, her voice calm despite the incline. Ben rolled his eyes. Strategic advantage. Right. Because nothing screams smart planning like a staircase made of loose gravel. Rufus barked from ahead, his silhouette visible against the ridge's crest. He turned back, wagging his tail as if to say, Hurry up, slowpokes. When they finally reached the top, the source of the energy readings came into view, a cluster of glowing crystalline structures embedded in the ground, their surfaces pulsating with an otherworldly light. Ben whistled. Well, that's something. What is it? Space geodes? Lyris knelt beside one of the crystals, her wrist device scanning it. These are energy conduits, likely remnants of an advanced civilization. Ben frowned. Advanced civilization, huh? So, what, they just left their batteries lying around? Unclear, Lyris said, but the energy signature matches the quantum relay's output. Ben crouched beside her, peering at the crystals. So what do we do? Plug in the relay and hope it doesn't blow up? Lyris tilted her head. Simplistic but accurate. Ben groaned. Great. Nothing like a little light electrocution to spice up the evening. As Lyris began setting up the relay module, Ben wandered around the crystalline field, his flashlight casting eerie shadows. Rufus followed close behind, sniffing at the glowing structures with cautious curiosity. The glebe poked its head out of Ben's pocket, chirping softly. You got something to say, buddy? Ben asked, holding up the flashlight to get a better look at it. The glebe chirped again, its antennae twitching. It leapt from Ben's pocket and scuttled toward one of the crystals, tapping it with one of its spindly legs. Hey, Ben called after it. What did I just say about causing galactic incidents? The crystal responded to the glebe's touch, its glow intensifying. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Ben backed away. Lyris? I think your glittery friend just turned on the space geode. Lyris looked up from the relay module, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the crystal. The glebe appears to have activated an energy feedback loop. Ben threw up his hands. Of course it did. Why wouldn't it? What does that even mean? Before Lyris could answer, the crystal emitted a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, a holographic projection hovered in the air above the crystalline field. The projection depicted a tall, humanoid figure with elongated limbs and a featureless face. Its voice echoed through the air, deep and resonant, speaking in a language Ben didn't understand. "Okay," Ben said, his voice shaky. "This is officially above my pay grade." Lyra stepped forward, her wrist device translating the alien language in real time. "It's a warning," she said. "The conduits are part of a containment system." "Containment for what?" Ben asked. Lyris didn't answer immediately. Her expression darkened as the hologram continued its message. "For a temporal anomaly," she finally said. "A rift in the fabric of space-time." Ben stared at her. "A rift? Like a black hole, but worse?" "Precisely," Lyris said. Ben groaned. "Why is it always something catastrophic? Why can't it ever be, I don't know, a lost alien puppy?" The glebe chirped indignantly, as if offended by the comparison. As Lyris worked to integrate the relay module with the crystalline conduits, Ben paced nervously, his flashlight beam darting across the rocky terrain. Rufus sat nearby, chewing on a stick he'd found, blissfully unaware of the impending doom. "Just so we're clear," Ben said, "if this rift thing opens up and swallows us, I'm blaming you." Lyris didn't look up. "Your blame is noted." Ben sighed, leaning against a rock. "You know, I used to think my biggest problem was keeping the coyotes out of the chicken coop. Now I'm dealing with quantum rifts and alien tech. Life comes at you fast, huh?" The glebe chirped in agreement, scuttling over to sit beside him. Yeah, Ben said, patting its shiny head. "You're not off the hook either, buddy." The hum of the crystalline field grew louder as the relay module powered up. The holographic projection flickered, its message repeating in an endless loop. Lyris stood, her expression grim. "The relay is ready. Once activated, it will send a distress signal across multiple dimensions." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Multiple dimensions? Isn't that a bit overkill?" "Standard protocol," Lyris said. Ben sighed. "Fine, let's do this. But if we end up summoning something worse than the enforcers, I'm holding you personally responsible." Lyris didn't respond, but Ben thought he saw the faintest hint of a smirk on her face as she activated the relay. The module emitted a high-pitched whine, and the crystalline field lit up like a Christmas tree. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a column of light shot into the sky, piercing the clouds. Ben shielded his eyes. "Well, that's subtle. No way anyone's going to miss that." As the light faded, the hum of the conduit subsided, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Lyris studied the relay module, her expression unreadable. "Signal transmitted. Now we wait." Ben groaned. "Great. Waiting. My favorite part of any life-threatening situation." The glebe chirped, hopping onto Ben's shoulder. Rufus barked, wagging his tail. Ben looked at them, then at Lyris. "You know, for a cosmic disaster, this almost feels normal." Lyris raised an eyebrow. "Normal is a relative term." Ben chuckled. "Yeah, well, I'll take what I can get." For a moment, the four of them stood together, watching the sky as the stars seemed to shimmer just a little brighter. The farmhouse came back into view, just as the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon. Ben eased the truck to a stop in the driveway, the engine rattling in protest. Rufus leapt out before the truck had fully stopped, racing toward the porch like he hadn't just spent the night chasing down alien rifts and dodging intergalactic enforcers. Ben, on the other hand, climbed out slowly, groaning as his knees protested the movement. "I swear, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and find out my back has filed for early retirement." Lyra stepped out of the truck with her usual grace, scanning the surroundings with her wrist device. The glebe sat perched on her shoulder, its scales shimmering faintly in the soft light. "Everything seems normal," Ben said, squinting toward the fields. "No glowing rifts, no alien SWAT teams, just good old-fashioned dirt and corn." "For now," Lyris replied. "The signal has been sent. Reinforcements should arrive to stabilize the anomaly before it becomes critical. Ben leaned against the truck, crossing his arms. So, what happens now? You head off with your alien buddies, and I go back to fixing fences and chasing off coyotes? Lyris didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze softening. You've done more than I could have asked, Ben. You've shown courage, resourcefulness, and a surprising amount of stubbornness. Ben smirked. Stubbornness is a family trait. My grandpa once argued with a scarecrow for half an hour before realizing it wasn't a person. Lyris tilted her head, clearly unsure whether or not to take him seriously. Inside the house, the atmosphere was almost surreal. The kitchen was exactly as they'd left it, the table cluttered with coffee mugs and the Glebe's half-eaten loaf of bread. Ben flopped into a chair, letting out a long sigh. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for some breakfast. Saving the universe really works up an appetite. The Glebe chirped excitedly, scuttling across the table to nudge the bread closer to him. Lyris raised an eyebrow. Your dietary habits are peculiar. Peculiar? Ben said, reaching for the bread. This coming from someone who eats nutrient paste out of a tube? Lyris opened her mouth to reply, but stopped as her wrist device beeped. She glanced at the display, her expression growing serious. What is it? Ben asked, his tone shifting. The enforcers have withdrawn, Lyris said. The signal disrupted their tracking systems. They won't find us here. Ben leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. Well, I'll be. We actually pulled it off. Later that morning, Ben found himself in the barn, repairing a section of the roof that had been damaged during the chaos of the past few days. Rufus lounged nearby, chewing on an old boot, while the Glebe fluttered around, inspecting everything with its usual curiosity. Lyris appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. You're fixing the roof? Yep, Ben said, hammering a nail into place. Figured I might as well get back to work before I start thinking too much about all the crazy alien stuff. Lyris stepped inside, her gaze wandering over the barn's rustic interior. This place is unique. Ben chuckled. That's a polite way of saying it's falling apart. No, Lyris said. It has character, a sense of permanence. Ben paused, looking down at her. You sound like someone who's never had a place to call home. Lyris didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked over to Rufus, crouching to scratch behind his ears. My life has been transient, always moving, always searching. Ben set down his hammer, leaning against the ladder. Well, if you ever get tired of running, you're welcome to stick around. We've got plenty of space, and Rufus could use someone else to throw sticks for him. Lyris looked up at him, her expression softening. I'll consider it. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the four of them, Ben, Lyris, Rufus, and the Glebe, sat on the porch, watching the stars. So, Ben said, breaking the comfortable silence, what happens if your reinforcements don't show up? Are we going to have to deal with another rift? The probability is low, Lyris said, but not zero. Great, Ben muttered. Guess I'll keep the truck gassed up just in case. The Glebe chirped, hopping onto his lap. You know, Ben said, scratching the little creature's head, for something that nearly got us killed, you're not half bad. The Glebe purred, its scales glowing faintly. Lyris watched them, a small smile tugging at her lips. You've adapted well to the unexpected. Ben laughed. Adapted? I've been winging it since the moment you showed up. Sometimes, Lyris said, improvisation is the key to survival. Ben nodded, his gaze drifting back to the stars. Yeah, and sometimes it's the key to something more. As the night deepened, the air grew cooler, and the sounds of the farm settled into a familiar rhythm. Ben leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Hey, Lyris, he said after a while. Yes? Thanks for, not vaporizing me or whatever it is aliens do to annoying humans. Lyris chuckled softly. "You're welcome." Ben grinned. "And if you ever need a place to hide out again, you know where to find me." Lyris nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'll remember." In the days that followed, life on the farm began to settle into a new kind of normal. Lyris stayed on, helping with repairs and teaching Ben more about the alien technology she'd left behind. The glebe became a permanent fixture, happily scuttling around the house and barn, much to Rufus's delight. And though the universe beyond the farm remained vast and unpredictable, Ben found himself looking forward to whatever came next. Because, as he'd learned, sometimes the most extraordinary adventures begin in the most ordinary places.